I woke up in a hospital bed to the sound of my own son whispering, "Just let him die. We need the insurance." The heart monitor beeped steadily, but inside me, something broke. He thought I was too weak to hear him, too powerless to stop him. What he didn't know was that my phone, hidden beneath the blanket, was recording every word. Weeks later, those same words echoed in a courtroom, louder than any scream I could have made. And when the lawyer pressed play, the room froze. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. When you get old, people think you stop listening. They think your ears fail, your memory fades, your will weakens. Maybe that's true for some, but not for me. My name is Walter Hale. I'm 72 years old, and I've lived long enough to know when words are meant to wound, and when they're meant to kill. The night I realized my own son wanted me gone, the world around me smelled of disinfectant and humming machines. The heart monitor ticked at its steady rhythm beside me, beeping like a metronome that measured out my hours. My chest still ached from the heart attack that landed me there, but it was nothing compared to the ache I felt when I heard Mark, my boy, the child I'd worked my whole life to raise, stand at my bedside and whisper, "Just sign the DNR. Dad doesn't need to suffer. The sooner we let him go, the sooner we can settle things." He didn't say it for me. He said it for the woman standing beside him, Brianna, his wife. She had the tone of someone discussing dinner plans, not life and death. The policy pays out more if he goes in the hospital. And with the debts, Mark, we need that money. I lay there with my eyes closed, hands folded against the thin blanket. They thought I was asleep, too weak to stir. What they didn't know was that inside my fist, beneath that blanket, my phone was turned on. I had pressed record the moment I sensed the conversation slipping into shadows. My thumb shook as I hit the button, but my voice stayed silent. Sometimes silence tells the story better than words. People ask how betrayal feels when it comes from your own child. Let me tell you, it doesn't feel like fire. It feels like ice. A cold that creeps up your veins, starting in the heart and freezing you from the inside out. I wanted to sit up, shout, grab him by the collar, and ask how he could talk like that about his own father. But I didn't. I knew one thing. Anger wouldn't protect me. Proof would. Lying there, I thought back to the first time I carried Mark in my arms. He was no heavier than a loaf of bread, swaddled in a hospital blanket that smelled of starch. My wife, Elaine, looked up at me with tired but glowing eyes, and I promised both of them that day, "I'll always keep you safe." The years since had tested that vow. Double shifts, long nights, missed meals. But I never once thought I'd need to keep myself safe from him. The monitor beeped on steady, like it was agreeing with me. I stayed still, breathing shallow, as Brianna leaned close enough that her perfume mixed with the antiseptic smell. "If we push now, the doctor will listen," she whispered. "We've got the power of attorney paperwork." Those words cut deeper than the IV in my arm. Power of attorney, signed in my name. Except I hadn't signed a thing. I felt the room tilt, but I steadied myself. This wasn't just carelessness. This was planned. They wanted me gone, and they'd already drawn up the papers to make it legal. A part of me, the old stubborn mechanic who fixed things with his hands, wanted to rip out the wires, sit up, and end it right there. But another part, the father who knew his son, understood something else. If they were bold enough to say it aloud, they thought they were untouchable. That arrogance would be their undoing. And so I waited. My phone listened. And in that quiet, sterile hospital room, while the people who should have loved me most plotted my end, I gathered the only weapon I had left, the truth. Hours later, when the night nurse checked my vitals, she gave me a look. Not pity, not suspicion, just kindness. Her name was Ray. She adjusted my blanket and whispered, "Your son was asking odd questions about DNR forms. You let me know if you're not comfortable." I wanted to grab her hand and tell her everything, but all I could manage was a nod. For now, silence was survival. That night stretched into eternity. I thought about my wife, gone 5 years now. I thought about Christmas mornings when Mark was small, paper snowflakes taped to the window because we couldn't afford lights. I thought about all the promises I had kept. And then I thought about the one I still had to keep, protecting my good name, my dignity, and my life, even if that meant protecting it from my own blood. By morning, I wasn't just a patient in a hospital bed. I was a man with proof, a man with resolve. And though my son didn't know it yet, he had already lost the one thing he thought he could take: control. I didn't tell a soul about that recording, not yet, because I knew if Mark was bold enough to forge one signature, he'd try for another, and I needed him to show his hand. When I left the hospital a few days later, cane in hand, and a new list of pills rattling in a paper bag, I thought maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe stress and medicine made me imagine what I heard. That's what part of me wanted to believe. But life has a way of showing you the truth, piece by piece, until denial no longer fits. Mark drove me home. The ride was quiet, except for the sound of his Bluetooth clicking every few minutes. He was on the phone with Brianna, always on the phone with her, whispering about paperwork and timelines. He thought I couldn't hear. He forgot that old ears hear plenty, especially when the voice carries guilt. When we pulled up to my small 2-story house, the same one I'd built with Elaine back in '78, he gave me a look I didn't recognize. Not a son's look, a calculating one. "Dad," he said, patting the steering wheel like it was a stage prop, "this place is too big for you now. You should think about downsizing, selling." Selling. My house. The bricks I'd laid. The doorframe I'd carved initials into with Elaine. The soil where I'd buried my dog Buddy 20 years ago. I forced a smile. "This old place still keeps me warm," I said, steady as I could. But the way he avoided my eyes told me he wasn't done. That night, as I sat in my recliner sipping lukewarm tea, I noticed an envelope on the counter. It was from the bank. Inside, a notice about attempted login from an unrecognized device. I hadn't logged into anything. My hands shook as I reread the letter. Someone had tried to access my account. I didn't need a detective to know who. The next day, Brianna came by with her perfect nails and her perfume that smelled like wilted lilies. She placed a folder on my kitchen table. "Mark and I have been talking," she said sweetly, "and it's time to get practical. Hospitals don't keep men your age alive forever. If you sign a DNR and update the power of attorney, it'll spare us all a lot of stress when the time comes." Her smile was rehearsed, her tone sugar over steel. I kept my voice even. "I never signed a power of attorney." She laughed, but her eyes didn't. "Oh, you must have forgotten. You did. It's already filed. We just need a few more signatures to keep things simple." My chest tightened, not from my heart condition, but from rage. I wanted to shout, to throw that folder out the window. Instead, I folded my hands on the table and said, "Leave it here, I'll review it." She left the folder, kissed me on the cheek like she hadn't just suggested my death, and walked out humming. I didn't open the folder that night. I didn't need to. My gut already knew. Later, as the street lamp outside flickered through my blinds, I thought about Elaine again. She'd always said, "Walt, watch how people handle money. It'll tell you how they'll handle love." I used to think she was being dramatic. Now I knew she was right. Mark and Brianna treated money like oxygen. They couldn't breathe without it. And if I was in the way, then maybe I was just another obstacle. The next morning, Nurse Ray from the hospital called to check in. She said something that sent a chill through me. "Your son asked me where he could find the DNR paperwork. I told him only you could request it. He didn't look pleased." That was the second time someone else confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intent. I walked into my bedroom, pulled the fireproof box from under the bed, and opened it. Inside were my deeds, insurance policy, and the EEO's will I'd carefully written years ago. My signature was firm, clear, unmistakable. No shaky scrawl, no confusion. And yet, Mark had something filed already, claiming to be me. I closed the box, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the floor. That's when the loneliness hit me hardest. A man can live alone, can bury his wife, can watch his friends fade, but to be erased by his own blood while still breathing? That's a loneliness words can't capture. And yet, beneath that loneliness, a spark lit. The same spark that kept me alive through years of factory layoffs, debt collectors, and the night I buried Elaine. Quiet, steady, determined. I told myself, if he wants me gone so badly, let him show his hand. Let him get sloppy. So I didn't call him. I didn't confront Brianna. I didn't even open that folder. I just waited. And I made sure the phone beside my chair was always charged, always ready. It didn't take long. Just 3 days later, I caught a glimpse of the papers he claimed I'd signed and saw my name written in someone else's hand. 3 days after Brianna left that folder on my kitchen table, curiosity got the better of me. I brewed a cup of coffee, set the folder down, and slid the papers out like I was disarming a trap. The first page was a photocopy of a durable power of attorney. My name sat neatly at the bottom, black ink, shaky and slanted. Except it wasn't mine. I know my own handwriting the way I know my own reflection. After decades of signing time cards, mortgage slips, and loan renewals, my hand never wavered in that particular way. This signature leaned wrong, almost like someone had traced the memory of my name rather than writing it themselves. My stomach dropped. They had gone from whispering to forging. I didn't even realize I was gripping the paper so tightly until my hand began to shake. The thought that my son, my blood, had sat at a table, pen in hand, and tried to be me made my skin crawl. And worse, he must have practiced it. The lines weren't clumsy. They were rehearsed. I shoved the papers back in the folder and sat there, staring at the quiet house. The tick of the old wall clock echoed too loudly, like it was mocking me. That evening, I called the hospital billing department under the guise of wanting copies for my own records. They hesitated, but agreed to send me the visitor logs from my stay. When they arrived in my mailbox, I flipped through the pages, scanning the list of people who had stopped by. There it was in black and white. Visitor inquiry, Mark Hale. Question, end-of-life directives. He had asked the staff directly how to push me toward a DNR. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was paper, dates, signatures. Still, I kept my mouth shut. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I carried my phone like a second heartbeat. I replayed the recording in the dead of night, over and over, until every syllable burned into my memory. Just let him die. We need the insurance. The words didn't soften with repetition. They hardened. I tried to keep myself busy. Fixed the creaky hinge on the shed door, oiled the mower, watered the tomatoes. But everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of trust, of what used to be. The workbench where Mark and I had built his first birdhouse. The patch of grass where he'd once run barefoot, chasing fireflies with a jar. The thought that those small hands had grown into ones willing to forge my name was enough to make a man feel sick. One night, I found myself digging through an old shoebox of photographs. There was one of Elaine holding Mark at age 5, his cheeks smudged with chocolate cake. Her eyes sparkled, her smile proud. I whispered into the quiet room, "Elaine, what did we do wrong?" But no picture ever answers back. The following week, I went for a checkup with Dr. Chen, my cardiologist. She's a straight-shooting woman, never one for pleasantries. When I told her I'd heard Mark and Brianna talking about DNRs, she frowned. "That's not unusual," she said at first. "Families often discuss end-of-life care." Then I pulled out my phone and pressed play. The recording filled her office, Mark's voice sharp and greedy, Brianna's calm suggestions about insurance money. When it ended, Dr. Chen looked at me differently, not like a patient, but like a man under threat. "Mr. Hale," she said carefully, "we'll keep your chart locked. No directives will change without your explicit, in-person consent. And if anyone pressures you again, you tell me. Do you understand?" I nodded, relief washing over me for the first time in weeks. At least someone believed me. At least someone in a position of authority heard the truth. As I left her office, cane tapping against the linoleum, I knew the war had begun. Quiet, legal, but real. My son thought he could script my exit. What he didn't realize was that I'd already started writing my own defense. That night, the phone rang. It was the bank fraud unit. A polite man with a tired voice said, "Mr. Hale, we noticed an attempted transfer of $28,400 from your account this morning. The paperwork was authorized with a power of attorney document. Do you recognize this?" My heart stopped. They faxed me the authorization. I stared at the pages until my hands went numb. There it was again, my signature. This time cleaner, more confident, as though practice was paying off. I whispered to myself, "He's not stopping. He won't stop until I stop him." The bank froze the transfer, but they warned me this wouldn't be the last attempt. And that's when I realized my own son wasn't just circling. He was already inside the house. The bank froze the transfer, but their warning echoed in my head long after I hung up the phone. "Mr. Hale, this won't be the last attempt." I sat in my living room, cane resting against the chair, the house too quiet for comfort. The curtain swayed gently from a draft, and for a moment I thought I heard Elaine's voice humming down the hallway, the way she used to when folding laundry. But when I turned, the hall was empty, just shadows and silence. Loneliness is a cruel companion. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It seeps into the corners of a man's life, especially when the faces he should be able to trust have turned against him. I tried to distract myself, turned on the old television, flipped through channels full of voices that didn't belong to me. But all I could hear was Mark's whisper at my hospital bed. "Just let him die. We need the insurance." Those words clung to me like a stain. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and found myself staring at Elaine's mug, the one with the faded roses on it, still sitting in the cabinet. I pulled it out, set it on the counter, and just looked. She had held this in her last days, her hand shaking as she sipped weak tea, and then, like a tide, the memory returned. Flashback number 2. Elaine's last night. I was by her hospital bed, holding her hand as the machines beeped steady. Her eyes were tired but bright, her smile faint but real. She squeezed my fingers and whispered, "Walt, promise me one thing. Don't let them write your ending. Protect your good name." At the time, I thought she meant neighbors, maybe creditors. I never imagined she was warning me about our own son. The weight of that memory pressed on me now like a stone. Tears came before I could stop them. It's a strange thing, crying alone. The sound feels foreign, like it doesn't belong in the room. I wiped my face and sat at the table, staring at the bank papers, the forged signature. That's when the loneliness turned into something sharper. A hollow ache, yes, but also a question that wouldn't let go. How did we get here? I thought back to Mark's childhood. How many times had I gone without so he could have what he wanted? I remembered the winter I patched the soles of my boots with duct tape just so I could afford his little league fees. I remembered the nights I came home from the factory, hands raw, dropping into bed without dinner because tuition was due. And yet, here we were. My sacrifices had turned into entitlement. My generosity had been twisted into a noose. I tried to think rationally, but my chest tightened with grief. Had I been too soft? Had I spoiled him? Or was it Brianna's influence, whispering in his ear about easy money and faster ways to live? I didn't know, and maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was this. I was still alive, and they wanted me not to be. That realization broke something inside me, not in the way a man breaks down and quits, but in the way a soldier breaks rank and decides it's time to fight on his own terms. I opened the fireproof box again, spread out the documents across the table, and stared at them like pieces of a puzzle. Deeds, policies, old wills. Every page told the story of my life's work. And now, someone was trying to erase it with a pen stroke. At 2 a.m., I walked to the front door, opened it, and let the night air hit my face. The stars above were sharp and clear. I whispered into the darkness, "Elaine, I'm not done yet. I'll keep your promise. I'll protect our name." For a moment, I swear I felt her beside me, like the warmth of a hand on my shoulder. When I turned back inside, something had shifted. Yes, I was lonely. Yes, I was betrayed. But I was not broken. Not yet. I went to bed with one thought looping in my head. If they want to play with signatures and lies, let them. I'll answer with truth, but I'll need help. The next morning, I made a call to an old number tucked in my wallet, the attorney Elaine and I once used when we wrote our will. And when she picked up, she didn't just hear my story. She heard the recording. The morning after that long, sleepless night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at a slip of paper I'd carried in my wallet for years. It was yellowed at the edges, the ink fading, but the name and number were still clear. Elena Alvarez, attorney at law. Elaine and I had gone to her office 20 years back to draft our first will. She was sharp, respectful, the kind of woman who looked you straight in the eye and made you feel like your words mattered. I hadn't spoken to her in over a decade, but if there was anyone I trusted to untangle the mess Mark was weaving, it was her. I dialed the number with a shaking finger. To my surprise, she answered herself. Her voice was deeper now, but steady. "Alvarez Law." "It's Walter Hale," I said quietly. "You helped my wife and me once. I think I need your help again." There was a pause on the other end. Then she said, "Mr. Hale, come in this afternoon. Bring whatever documents you have. And if there's something you want me to hear, bring that too." Her tone left no room for hesitation. I hung up and sat there, the phone heavy in my hand. I knew what she meant. She wanted the recording. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just carrying a piece of evidence. I was carrying a weapon. On the drive to her office, my mind wandered back through years I hadn't touched in a while. Elaine and I weren't wealthy people. I was a machinist. She worked part-time at the library until her health failed. Every dollar had a purpose, and most of those dollars went to Mark. When he was little, I'd patch my own boots with duct tape so he could have cleats for baseball. I remember one Christmas. The factory had cut overtime, and money was tight. Elaine and I sat at the table after Mark went to bed, counting coins from a jar to see if we could afford the toy truck he wanted. We came up $20 short. I sold my old fishing rods the next morning, just to see the joy on his face when he opened that box. That's what being a father felt like to me, going without, so your child could feel whole. When college came, I picked up double shifts. I still remember coming home so tired I'd sit on the front porch and nod off with my lunch pail in my lap. Elaine would wake me gently, lead me inside, and whisper, "One day, Walt, he'll understand what you gave." But now, as I thought about the forged signatures and whispered betrayals, I wasn't sure he ever had. Elena's office hadn't changed much. Same modest sign, same brown leather chairs. She greeted me warmly, but her eyes narrowed when she saw the folder under my arm. I laid everything on her desk, the forged POA, the bank notices, the hospital visitor logs. Then, with trembling fingers, I unlocked my phone and pressed play. Mark's voice filled the room. "Just let him die. We need the insurance." Brianna's response followed. "The policy pays more if he goes in the hospital." Elena's jaw tightened. She didn't interrupt, didn't look away. When the clip ended, she leaned back and folded her hands. "Mr. Hale," she said, "you understand what this is?" I nodded slowly. "Proof." "More than proof," she corrected. "This is attempted elder financial exploitation. It borders on attempted fraud, possibly even attempted homicide, if they pressured medical staff. At the very least, it's a forgery case waiting to be opened." The words hit me like a hammer. Forgery, exploitation, fraud. Ugly words, but they gave shape to what I had been too ashamed to call by name. Elena began outlining steps, her voice brisk. 1. Immediate freezes on all bank accounts and insurance policies. 2nd. Revocation of any existing powers of attorney. 3rd. Notification to the hospital so no directives could be altered without my in-person consent. 4. Filing a petition for temporary restraining order to keep Mark and Brianna from accessing my finances. She slid a paper toward me. "Sign this retainer. I'll start today." For a moment I hesitated. Not because I doubted her, but because signing felt like admitting something I still didn't want to believe, that my own son was my enemy. But then I thought of Elaine, her last words. "Protect your good name." My hand steadied. I signed. When I left the office, a heaviness settled over me. The world outside carried on like nothing had happened. Cars rolled by, kids shouted in the distance, a dog barked. And yet, my life felt like it had split into before and after. I drove home in silence, the roads blurring past. Somewhere between the stoplights and the empty driveway, the grief caught up with me. I pulled into the garage, shut off the engine, and sat there with my head against the steering wheel. How does a man grieve the loss of a son who's still alive? It wasn't the kind of grief you can bury with a funeral or soften with condolences. It was raw, unfinished, open-ended. I remembered the first time Mark rode a bike without training wheels. He wobbled down the street, turned to grin at me and shouted, "I did it, Dad!" The pride I felt that day could have lit the whole block. Now, years later, that same boy was plotting how to profit from my death. I stayed in that car until the sun dipped low, shadows stretching across the driveway. When I finally stepped inside, I wasn't just Walter the father anymore. I was Walter the survivor. And I knew this battle wasn't going to be fought with shouting or fists. It would be fought with paperwork, patience, and truth. That night, I sat at the table with my phone in front of me. I opened a new recording file, stared at the little red circle, and whispered, "Elaine, I've started. I'll keep your promise. He won't write my ending." Elena warned me. Mark wouldn't stop after one failed attempt. She said he'd get bolder, desperate. And she was right, because the very next week he showed up at my doorstep, with a smile and a pen. Elena was right. Mark didn't wait long. Less than a week after our meeting, he knocked on my door like any dutiful son coming to check on his old man. He carried a smile stretched too wide, the kind of smile people put on when they've already decided something for you. In his hand was a clipboard, papers clipped neatly, and a pen tapping against the edge like a ticking clock. "Dad," he said warmly, "how are you feeling?" "Looking stronger." He glanced past me into the house before I even invited him inside. "Mind if I come in? Just for a chat?" I stepped aside. My house still smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner I'd used that morning, the kind Elaine always favored. As Mark walked in, I couldn't help but notice how comfortable he looked, like he already believed the place belonged to him. He sat at the table without waiting to be asked, setting the clipboard down in front of him. "Dad," he began, voice low and sympathetic, "Brianna and I have been talking. You know we only want what's best for you. Managing everything, the bills, the insurance, the house. It's a lot at your age. If you just sign this updated POA, we can take all that stress off your shoulders." He slid the papers toward me with the confidence of a salesman closing a deal. My stomach knotted. I picked up the first page and looked at it. Legal jargon filled the top, but my eyes went straight to the bottom where a line waited for my signature. My name was already printed there, like an invitation to erase myself. I set it down slowly. "Mark," I said evenly, "I don't recall asking you to manage my life." His jaw tightened for just a moment before he forced a smile. "Dad, you've been through a lot. We're just trying to help. If you'd seen how worried Brianna was when you collapsed." I cut him off. I remember what Brianna said at my hospital bed. "The policy pays more if he dies in the hospital." Those were her words. The smile slipped. His eyes narrowed. "You must have misheard." I leaned forward. "Did I?" Silence stretched between us. For the first time, I saw the calculation fade, replaced by a flicker of panic. He hadn't expected me to confront him. He thought I was still too weak, too gullible. I stood, cane in hand, and walked slowly to the counter. My phone lay there, screen dark, but inside it was the recording that would undo him. I didn't show it, not yet. Instead, I turned back to him and said, "You're asking me to sign away my life. And you think I'll do it because I'm tired. But let me tell you something, son. Tired doesn't mean finished." His cheeks flushed. He grabbed the clipboard, shoved the papers back into his bag, and stood. "Fine," he snapped. "But don't come crying to me when things fall apart." I watched him storm out, the screen door banging behind him. My chest ached, but it wasn't my heart this time. It was the sight of the boy I'd once carried on my shoulders, now walking away with a stranger's greed in his eyes. After he left, I sat at the table for a long while, staring at the spot where the papers had been. I thought about Elaine again, about her steady faith in people, her belief that love could outlast anything. I wanted to believe it too. But love hadn't stopped Mark from practicing my signature until it looked real. Love hadn't stopped him from whispering my death sentence in a hospital room. I reached for the phone and called Elena. When she picked up, I told her what happened. She didn't sound surprised. "He's pushing harder because he thinks he's running out of time," she said. "That makes him dangerous, but also sloppy. Keep the recording safe. And Walter, don't be alone when you confront him next." Her words stayed with me. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about documents or money. This was about survival. My own son had crossed a line so dark that love couldn't drag him back. That night I sat on the porch as the sun went down, the sky painted in streaks of orange and purple. I held Elaine's mug in my hand, cold tea inside. "I'll fight, love," I whispered to the fading light. "Not with anger, but with truth. I'll fight the way you'd want me to." The cicadas hummed in the trees, the night settling in around me. I knew the next step wouldn't be easy. But I also knew one thing. Mark had declared war the moment he forged my name, and I wasn't planning to lose. The morning after Mark stormed out, I sat at the table with my coffee growing cold, staring at the stack of documents Elena had already filed on my behalf. Restraining order petition, revocation notices, letters to the bank. They looked so ordinary, just sheets of paper, but in them was the difference between my survival and my son's success in erasing me. I dialed Elena again, and this time she asked me to come in with everything I had. Deeds, insurance policies, and the shoebox of old papers I'd kept hidden under my bed for years. If you want to protect yourself, she said firmly, we need to put barriers in place. Think of it like locking the doors of a house while a thief is circling outside. When I arrived, her assistant ushered me into a conference room with walls lined in heavy law books. Elena sat at the head of the table, glasses perched low, her pen already in motion. She listened as I explained how Mark had shown up with the clipboard, how he pushed me to sign another POA, how he tried to sell it as help. She didn't flinch. "Mr. Hale," she said, "we're going to stop him. Here's the plan." First, she froze all financial accounts linked to my name. No transactions without my direct approval. Second, she contacted the title office to flag my property, so no one could attempt a transfer without my physical presence. Third, she drafted an emergency document placing all medical authority in her hands and Dr. Chen's hands, removing Mark entirely. "This way," she said. "He can't bully hospital staff or slip anything through the cracks." She slid the drafts across the table. I signed them one by one, each stroke of my pen like reclaiming a piece of myself. But then she leaned in and lowered her voice. "Walter, this isn't just about protection. This is about building a record. Every attempt he makes, every signature he forges, every word he says, we're documenting it. Because one day soon, we'll put it in front of a judge. And judges don't care about feelings. They care about evidence. Do you have the stomach for that?" I thought of Elaine. I thought of her last night, her hand in mine, whispering for me to protect my good name. I thought of the boy I once carried on my shoulders, now a man willing to see me buried for a check. My jaw tightened. "I do," I said. That night, back home, I sat by the fire with the recording in my hand. For the first time, I imagined it playing not in my living room, but in a courtroom, or a lawyer's office with Mark sitting across from me. I pictured his face when he realized I'd heard every word. And I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt something steadier. Resolve. But resolve didn't quiet the ache. After the fire burned low, I wandered into the den and opened another shoebox of memories. Inside were photographs. Mark's first day of kindergarten. The old station wagon we drove across 3 states for a family vacation. Elaine laughing in the kitchen with flour on her hands. I studied them one by one. That's when another memory surfaced. Flashback. It was his high school graduation. Mark stood at the podium, nervous but proud, and afterward he hugged me tight. "Thanks for working so hard, Dad," he said. "I know you did it all for me." At the time, it was the proudest moment of my life. Now, looking back, I wondered, where did that gratitude go? When did it sour into greed? The fire popped, and I slid the photo back into the box. Gratitude didn't last forever, but paperwork did. The next morning, Elena called. "Walter, the bank flagged another attempt. Smaller this time, just under $3,000. They tried to sneak it under the radar. We blocked it. But this shows you. He's desperate, and desperate men make mistakes." Her words hung in the air long after we ended the call. Mistakes. That was what I needed. I didn't want to destroy my son with rage. I wanted him to destroy himself, with his own words, his own signatures, his own greed. So I waited. I charged my phone each night, kept it within reach, and stayed quiet. Quiet as a man loading a weapon, one piece at a time. It wasn't long before my patience paid off. Because a week later, Elena scheduled something I knew would change everything. A face-to-face meeting in her office, with Mark and Brianna present. She wanted them in the same room, sitting across from me, with the recording ready to play. "Are you sure you're up for it?" she asked me. I nodded slowly. "I've been up for it since the night I heard my son whisper about letting me die. It's time he hears his own voice out loud." I hung up the phone and sat in silence, staring at the empty chair across from me. One day soon, Mark would be sitting there again. But this time, he wouldn't be asking me to sign over his life. He'd be forced to hear exactly what he tried to steal. The day of the meeting came quicker than I expected. Elena's office smelled faintly of old wood and coffee, the kind of place where truth had a way of clinging to the air. I sat at the long conference table, my cane leaning against the chair, a pitcher of water and neat stacks of folders in front of me. My heart thumped steady, not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to happen. The door opened, and in walked Mark with Brianna at his side. He looked polished, confident, like a man about to close a business deal. Brianna wore her usual mask of polite superiority, her heels clicking sharp against the floor. They both smiled, as though this were just another family catch-up. "Dad," Mark said smoothly, "you look good. Strong." His eyes flicked to the folders, then back to me. "We're glad you agreed to meet." I didn't answer. Instead, I let Elena take control. She introduced herself formally, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Thank you for coming. Mr. Hale has retained my services regarding his estate and financial matters. Today, we'll clarify some issues that have recently come to light." Mark nodded, smug. "Good. I was hoping we could sort this all out before things get messy." Brianna placed her manicured hand on his arm, her smile never wavering. "We're only here to help Walter. We don't want any misunderstandings." That's when Eleanor reached for the small black speaker on the table. She pressed a button. A familiar sound filled the room, the faint buzz of hospital machines, the shuffle of shoes against tile. And then, my son's voice. "Just let him die. We need the insurance." Brianna's voice followed, smooth and casual. "The policy pays more if he goes in the hospital." The room froze. The words hung heavy, undeniable. Mark's smile cracked, his face draining of color. Brianna's eyes darted to the floor, then to the door, as though looking for an escape. I didn't speak. I just watched the weight of their own voices crash down on them. Elena let the clip play in full before she stopped it. Then she leaned forward, her gaze sharp. That recording, combined with the forged power of attorney, attempted transfers, and the hospital visitor logs, establishes a clear pattern of elder exploitation and fraud. Mr. Hale has chosen to pursue this matter legally. Mark opened his mouth, but no words came. Finally, he stammered, "Dad, you don't understand." It was taken out of context. I raised my hand to stop him. "I understand perfectly. I heard you plan my death. I saw the papers with my forged name. And now so is she." I nodded toward Elena. "There's no context that changes that." For the first time, his confidence cracked completely. He looked smaller, cornered. Brianna's mask slipped into a scowl. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "We were only thinking about his comfort. And if there was a little financial relief, so what? Families help each other." Elena slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were copies of the attempted wire transfer, visitor logs, and forensic analysis of the forged signature. "A prosecutor will decide what to call it," she said coldly. Mark swallowed hard, his knuckles white against the table. "Dad, please," he whispered, desperation leaking into his voice. We can work this out privately. You don't need to involve outsiders." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. "You stopped being private the moment you stood over my hospital bed and asked for my death. Outsiders are the only reason I'm still alive." Silence settled over the room. Elena tapped her pen once against the folder. "Mr. Hale has authorized me to move forward with a temporary restraining order and to notify the district attorney's office. This meeting was a courtesy." Mark's face crumpled. Brianna stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. "This is a waste of time," she spat. "Come on, Mark." But Mark didn't move. He just sat there, staring at me, as though trying to find the father he remembered, and realizing that man wasn't going to save him this time. I stood slowly, cane steady in my hand. "We're done here," I said quietly. "Next time you hear my voice, it'll be in court." And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving the weight of the truth echoing behind me. Courtrooms have a smell all their own: old varnish, dust, and the faint bite of disinfectant. As I shuffled in with Elena by my side, cane tapping against the tile, I felt every eye turn toward me, not in pity, but in curiosity. Folks in our small county had heard whispers. They knew something was wrong in the Hale family. Now they were here to see it brought into the light. Mark sat at the defense table, shoulders stiff. Brianna perched beside him like a hawk protecting its nest. His suit was pressed, his hair neatly combed, but no polish could hide the flicker of panic in his eyes. He didn't look at me, not once. The judge, a tall man with gray hair, called the case to order. Elena stood first. Her voice was steady, practiced. "Your Honor, this case concerns attempted elder financial exploitation, forgery, and coercion. My client, Mr. Walter Hale, has been the target of a deliberate scheme by his son, Mark Hale, and daughter-in-law, Brianna Hale. Today, we submit evidence that makes their intentions unmistakable." She pressed play on the same recording that had frozen the lawyer's office days earlier. The static of the heart monitor filled the courtroom, then Mark's voice cut through. "Just let him die. We need the insurance." Then Brianna's calm addition. "The policy pays more if he goes in the hospital." You could have heard a pin drop. Even the judge leaned forward, his lips pressed tight. Or Mark leapt to his feet, his voice desperate. "That's not what I meant. It was taken out of context. We were talking about hospice care." His excuse tumbled out like broken glass, sharp but fragile. But Elena was ready. She laid the forged POA in front of the judge, alongside the bank's fraud alerts and the hospital visitor logs. Each piece of paper landed like a hammer blow. The judge turned the document slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he looked directly at Mark. "Mr. Hale, these signatures do not match your father's. The bank confirms attempted unauthorized transfers, and this recording leaves little room for misinterpretation. Do you understand the seriousness of this?" Mark's voice cracked. "Dad, please, tell him this isn't who I am." For the first time, I spoke. My voice didn't shake. "I don't need to tell him anything. You already told the truth in that hospital room." Gas rippled through the courtroom. Brianna's face hardened. Her mask had shattered, leaving only anger beneath. She leaned close to Mark and hissed something, but the judge raised his gavel for silence. "Effective immediately," he declared, "Mr. Mark Hale is barred from accessing or managing any of his father's financial, medical, or legal affairs. This court also refers the matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of fraud and forgery." The gavel struck, sharp as a gunshot. Just like that, the roles shifted. I wasn't the weak old man in a hospital bed anymore. I was the one protected by law. As we filed out, whispers filled the gallery. Neighbors, old coworkers, even folks from church. All of them staring not at me, but at Mark. His face was pale, his steps heavy, as if he finally realized the cost of his greed. Outside, Pastor Jim caught my arm gently. "Walter," he said, "you've carried this burden alone too long. Now the truth carries it for you." His words steadied me more than the cane in my hand. That evening, I sat in my recliner and turned on the local news. There it was, my story, our story, told in crisp anchors' voices. The headline read, "Elderly Father Protected After Forgery and Insurance Scheme Exposed in Court." My stomach twisted. I never wanted fame. I never wanted eyes on me. But as I watched, I thought about Elaine. I thought about her promise. And I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every old man who thought he was alone when his family turned cold. I switched off the television, leaned back, and closed my eyes. Justice wasn't finished yet. But for the first time in a long time, I slept without fear. After the hearing, things didn't quiet down right away. Court orders might protect a man on paper, but life is lived outside of courtrooms, in neighborhoods and grocery aisles where people whisper when you walk past. In the weeks that followed, I felt the weight of both shame and vindication. Shame that my son had dragged my name into the papers, vindication that the truth had been spoken aloud, where no one could deny it. Elena kept busy, filing motions and tying knots around every loose end Mark might try to pull. She arranged with the title office to secure my home permanently in my name. She worked with the bank to set up triple verification measures. She even called the insurance company directly, ensuring all beneficiaries went into a trust, not into Mark's greedy hands. "Mr. Hale," she told me one afternoon as we sat in her office, "I've seen plenty of cases like this. Too often, they end with the parent destitute, stripped of everything. But you caught it in time. And more importantly, you had the courage to act. You should know that matters." Her words struck me harder than she realized. For weeks, I'd questioned myself. Was I cruel to let my son face public humiliation? Was I vindictive for pressing charges instead of forgiving quietly? But when she said that, "You caught it in time," something eased in me. Maybe survival itself was a kind of victory. Still, I wasn't done. I thought of Lily, my granddaughter, caught in the middle of all this. She was just 12, innocent, her eyes still bright with the kind of trust I once had for her father. I couldn't let her inheritance fall into his hands, or her future be dictated by his mistakes. So Elena and I drew up a new plan, an irrevocable trust. Every penny of my savings, every asset that would have once gone through Mark, would now bypass him entirely. The trust would fund Lily's education, her health care, and one day, a modest first home. The disbursements would be handled by a trustee Elena appointed, someone with no ties to either side of the family. When the papers were complete, Elena slid them across the table. "This way, Walter. Even if your son tries again, there will be nothing left for him to touch. The law will stand between him and your legacy." I signed without hesitation. The pen didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like a sword. At home that evening, I opened my fireproof box one last time. The forged documents that Mark had left me, the evidence of his betrayal. I stacked them neatly, sealed them in a separate envelope, and marked it in bold letters. Evidence not to be destroyed. Then I placed it back in the box right beside Elaine's wedding ring. Proof of love, proof of betrayal, side by side. That was my life story in a single container. Days later, the fallout hit the community. At church, folks who once admired Mark's easy charm now looked at him differently. I heard murmurs in the pews, saw the way Brianna pulled him by the arm to leave early. At the grocery store, neighbors avoided his eyes, some shaking their heads as he passed. The man who thought he'd inherit my world was now the man people crossed the street to avoid. I didn't gloat, I didn't smile, but I walked taller. One evening, Lily came to visit. She sat at the kitchen table, legs swinging, her eyes searching mine. "Grandpa," she asked softly, "is it true? Did Dad really do those things?" I couldn't bring myself to tell her everything. She was too young to bear the full weight. Instead, I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Your dad made mistakes," I said carefully. "But what matters is that you remember who you are. You come from love, not greed." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. Then she smiled faintly. "Mom says you're stronger than anyone she knows." That night after she left, I sat on the porch with Elaine's mug in my hand. The sky stretched wide and dark above me, the cicadas humming their endless song. I thought of all I had lost. My wife, the son I thought I knew, and of what I had saved. My dignity, my name, and the chance for Lily to grow without the poison of her father's schemes. And for the first time in a long time, I whispered not a promise, but a prayer. "Thank you, Elaine. I kept it. I kept your promise." I thought the courtroom had ended things, but endings rarely come that clean. A week after the judge's order, I was sitting in my recliner with the evening news murmuring in the background when headlights swept across my living room window. A knock followed, hard, urgent. I opened the door to find Mark on my porch. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot, suit rumpled like he'd been wearing it for days. For a moment, I almost saw the boy I'd raised, lost and frightened. But then his mouth opened, and out came the man who had betrayed me. "Dad, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "You can't do this to me. Everyone's turned against me. The DA's looking into charges. Brianna's threatening to leave. The neighbors. God, the neighbors won't even look at me. You're destroying me." I steadied myself on the cane. "No, Mark. You destroyed yourself." He flinched like I'd struck him. "I was desperate," he whispered. "We were drowning in debt. Brianna kept pushing. I thought if I could just get ahead for once." His words trailed off into the night air. I shook my head slowly. "You thought if you buried me, life would get easier? You were wrong." Tears filled his eyes. "I'm still your son." I looked at him for a long moment, heart heavy. "You're my blood, yes. But being my son was about more than that. It was about trust, and that you threw away." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the crickets in the yard. At last, he wiped his face with the back of his hand, anger flickering through the grief. "Fine, do what you want, but don't expect me to come back when you're old and alone." I gave a bitter laugh. "I already am, Mark, and you made sure of that." He turned, stomped down the steps, and drove off into the dark. The red glow of his taillights faded until the street was quiet again. I stood there for a moment, cane pressing into the porch boards, breathing in the cool night air. A part of me mourned, not for the man who left, but for the boy he used to be. The boy who once hugged me after his first bike ride, who once whispered thanks at his graduation. That boy was gone, replaced by a man I no longer recognized. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaustion settling in. Yet beneath the sorrow, there was peace, because no matter what Mark said, I wasn't powerless anymore. The law was on my side. My legacy was safe, and Lily, sweet Lily, would never have to pay for her father's sins. In the days that followed, Elena confirmed the trust had been finalized. Every penny of my savings, the house, even my insurance policies, all secured beyond Mark's reach. She gave me a copy of the final paperwork, bound neatly in a folder. I set it in the fireproof box beside Elaine's ring and the cedar duck I'd carved for Lily. That was my legacy now. Truth, dignity, protection. Word spread fast in town. At church the next Sunday, people clapped me on the shoulder, some offering quiet apologies for not noticing sooner. Pastor Jim prayed over me at the end of service, thanking God for justice in the face of betrayal. Mark didn't show. Brianna didn't either. And when I went home, I didn't feel the sting of loneliness I'd carried for weeks. I felt lighter because I knew the truth. I hadn't lost everything. I'd kept the one thing worth saving, my name. That night, as I washed out Elaine's mug and set it on the counter, I whispered into the stillness, "I did it, love. I kept the promise. He didn't write my ending. I did. I carried the mug to the porch, sat down, and watched the stars flicker to life above. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe easy, because the fight was over, and I had won." Months passed after that night on the porch when Mark walked away for the last time. Seasons changed, snow melting into spring, and still the silence from him remained. I didn't chase it. For once in my life, I didn't feel the need to run after my son and patch the cracks he'd made. Some cracks aren't meant to be patched. They're meant to stay broken so you never forget what poured through them. The DA's office moved steadily. Mark was called in for questioning more than once. He tried to spin the story, claimed the recording was doctored, that he'd been talking about my comfort, not my death. But lies don't hold up under the weight of paperwork. The bank's evidence of the wire transfers, the hospital logs, and the signature analysis left little doubt. Eventually, charges for forgery and attempted financial exploitation were filed. The news spread again, this time with Mark's face beside the word fraud. Brianna didn't wait around. By summer, word reached me she had filed for separation, taking Lily with her. Some folks might think I'd celebrate, but I didn't. I thought of Lily, caught between parents who had turned on each other. I prayed she'd be shielded from the worst of it. She visited me often, more often than before. At first, she didn't talk much, just sat on the porch with me, sipping cocoa and staring at the fireflies. But little by little, she opened up. One evening, she asked, "Grandpa, why does Dad keep saying you ruined everything?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Because, sweetheart, when people make bad choices, they don't like looking in the mirror. They'd rather blame someone else. But the truth is, he ruined himself. You remember that?" She nodded, her small face set with a seriousness beyond her years. Meanwhile, life grew simpler for me. With Elena's help, I finalized the trust and handed her a sealed letter to deliver to Lily when she turned 18. Inside, I wrote not about money or property, but about love. I told her about the cedar duck I carved for her, about the Christmas paper snowflakes, about her grandmother's laugh. I wanted her to know that even if her father stumbled, her roots were deep and strong. Neighbors who once kept their distance now stopped by with casseroles, tools to fix the gutter, or just kind words. At church, Pastor Jim often used my story, not naming names, but speaking about how truth protects the vulnerable. Each time I felt Elaine's hand on my shoulder again, that quiet reminder I'd kept my promise. As for Mark, he faded from my life. Last I heard, he was working odd jobs in another county, waiting for the legal storm to settle. Some nights I wondered if he hated me, if he cursed my name the way I once cursed my own father in moments of youthful anger. But then I'd remind myself, hate or not, he couldn't touch me anymore. He couldn't touch what mattered. Because in the end, justice had been done, not the loud kind. Not the vengeful kind, but the quiet, enduring kind that leaves a man free to sit on his porch at dusk, mug in hand, watching the stars come alive. And that's how my story closes, not with triumph, but with peace. My son chose greed. I chose truth. And truth, though heavy, carried me through. I leaned back in my chair one evening, Lily's laughter drifting from the yard as she chased fireflies and whispered to the night, "I wrote my own ending, Elaine, and it's one I can live with. In the end, it was almost poetic. The very words my son whispered over my hospital bed, "Just let him die, we need the insurance," were the ones that saved me. He thought I was too weak, too far gone to notice, but my phone remembered everything. Weeks later, those words echoed in a courtroom, played back for all to hear. They weren't just proof of his betrayal. They were proof of my survival. Proof that the truth, even spoken in the quietest whisper, has a way of roaring when the time comes. And so, I lived on, not as the old man they thought they could erase, but as the father who chose to write his own ending, an ending of dignity, justice, and peace.